Hello, Tony, your deck architect here, back on my channel once more with another deck profile. As you may be already aware, our latest release for the Yu-Gi-Oh card game was the next major structure deck in Albaz Strike. And with it comes several powerful cards designed to fit perfectly with older fusion strategies to create some powerful and interesting meta decks. And while the general consensus on the most competitive version is another engine combination deck in branded Destiny Despia, that is not what I'm particularly interested in showcasing today. See, on top of the powerhouse that is branded Fusion, Albaz Strike also introduces several monsters designed to support Fallen of Albaz, and I think that's worth exploring. Now you may be asking, isn't the support for Fallen Albaz the same support that encompasses most of the branded variants? And while yes, that is technically true, there actually is a key distinction between the two. Allow me to explain. What you primarily see in decks like branded Despia is predominantly branded support. And while many of the branded support also mention Albaz, functionally and thematically they cover different things. Thematically, the branded are the group that Fallen of Albaz, the titular character of the Albaz saga, originates from. This enigmatic group, so far only having two known members in Fallen of Albaz, and Albaz, the Jester Despia, interacts primarily with fusion monsters. This is perfectly shown in a card like the Albaz, who despite being a Despia monster, actually doesn't directly mention Despia in any of its effects, instead mentioning branded cards and generically level 8 or higher fusions. With that being said, Albaz, also originating from this group, makes use of branded cards as well, with many of those cards aimed at interacting with Albaz's various fusion forms. But throughout the sets since Rise of the Duelist, we've been slowly getting cards here and there that just support cards that list Fallen of Albaz. And with the release of the Albaz Strike structure deck, we finally have the final pieces we need to bring everything together to produce what you see here, a real Albaz focused deck. This deck, while perfectly capable of focusing and operating like other branded variants, has its own unique interactions with prior Albaz fusions and the various archetypes shown throughout the Albaz saga. It has a greater focus on manipulating the sending of those fusions to recover advantage, and has several very versatile and creative lines of play that I don't think you'll see in other variants. And I can't wait to showcase that as I get through this deck profile. So with that, I believe I've droned on long enough. Without a further ado, let's get into the deck profile. Getting right into things, we begin with the titular hero of this deck in Fallen of Albaz. Fallen of Albaz is a very simple monster. When summoned by discarding a card, Fallen of Albaz can perform a fusion summon using itself and any monsters on the field, except the ones you control. This effect can be incredibly useful as it provides any deck running the appropriate fusion targets non-targeting removal by way of a super poly-esque effect. More importantly though, Fallen of Albaz is a listed requirement in a number of fusion monsters released throughout sets in these last 2 years, and as such is crucial to our ability to access any of them. However, despite these things, Albaz is somewhat of a brick in this deck. Because his effect functionally only allows you to fusion summon using your opponent's monsters and himself, he's not exactly great going first. And thanks to the number of options that we have to access him from the deck or graveyard, we also seldom have a need to actually open him. As such, he's often a card that we'd rather want in the deck or in the graveyard than in our hand. Fortunately, we are running a fair number of cards that require us to either discard or shuffle cards back in the deck. So in those situations where you see Albaz and one of those cards, feel free and do not hesitate to use Albaz as the fodder for them, as often doing so will be at your advantage long term. Now, before I proceed further with the rest of the monsters, I'm going to digress a bit first to talk about the many fusions that can be made using Albaz. Since Rise of the Duelist, every core set that we've gotten has come with a level 8 Fallen of Albaz fusion in relation to whatever Albaz Saga archetype that we also got in that set. And for this deck, we're playing all of them. From Rise of the Duelist representing the Dogmatica, we have the one Titan-clad the Ashen Dragon. From Phantom Rage representing the Tri-Brigade, we have the two Brigand the Glory Dragon. From Blazing Vortex representing the Spriggans, we have the one Sprin the Iron Dash Dragon, and from Lightning Overdrive representing the Branded, we have two Albion the Branded Dragon. Lastly, from the Albaz Strike Stretch deck, representing both the Branded, the Sorcel, and the Ice Jade, we have 2 Lubellion the Searing Dragon and 3 Mirror Jade the Ice Blade Dragon. Each of these fusion monsters requires a Fallen of Albaz and a different generic fusion material to make. Titanclad can be made using a Fallen of Albaz and any monster with 2500 attack or greater. Brigand requires Fallen of Albaz alongside any level 8 or higher monster. Sprint requires a Fallen of Albaz and a monster special summoned this turn, while Albion and Lubellion require Fallen of Albaz plus any light or dark monster respectively. Finally, Mirror Jade requires Fallen of Albaz alongside any Fusion, Synchro, Xyz, or Link monster. Between these 6 monsters, you have coverage of almost every viable boss monster characteristic in the game, whether that be a large monster, a high level monster, a newly summoned monster, a chaos monster, or an X-Deck monster. This means that when actually using Fallen of Albaz's effect, you can almost always go into a viable target to fuse from your opponent's field, ensuring that you can always remove a threat from your opponent's field doing so. But beyond their summoning requirements, each Albaz fusion also has its own strengths and uses. Titanclad gains attack equal to its materials levels and has card effect immunity for the turn it was summoned, making him a safe beater to end games with. Brigand cannot be destroyed by battle and prevents your opponent from targeting your other monsters with monster effects while on the field, making him a versatile wall. Sprint can shift monster zones to destroy all face-up cards in its prior column, making him flexible multi-removal. Albion and Lubellion each perform an additional fusion summon on summon by either banishing materials from the hand, field, or grave, or shuffling back materials from the field, grave, or banished. Both provide you further extension into additional boss monsters without consuming additional resources, with the only cost among them being that Lubellion requires you to discard a card. A cost that might actually be a flexible benefit depending on what you want in the graveyard for Lubellion's fusion effect. Finally, Mirror Jade, as a quick effect, can send any of the fusions listing Fallen of Albaz in its materials from the X deck to the graveyard to non-targeting banish any monster on the field. However, in doing this, you cannot use this effect again in the following turn. This effect serves 2 fronts. The first is that it's the only effect among our fusions that actually interacts with the opponent, making Mirror Jade crucial in having any disruption game. The second is that it sends our fusions directly to the graveyard. Now you may be wondering, why would you do that? Well, beyond just being boss monsters, each of the initial 4 Albaz fusions possesses an effect that triggers on the end phase of a turn that they are sent to the graveyard to either search or special summon out a Fallen of Albaz or a monster from their related archetype. Titanclad, being related to the Dogmatica, can grab for Albaz or any Dogmatica monster. Brigand, related to the Tri-Brigade, can grab for an Albaz or any Tri-Brigade monster. Sprint, related to the Spriggans, can grab for Albaz or any Spriggans monster, and Albion, being uniquely related to the Branded, can search or set any branded spell or trap from the deck. These effects not only help you recoup resources after your fusions are sent to the graveyard, but also provide you tutors into cards from archetypes beyond Albaz itself. And this latter benefit is especially relevant when considering the new cards we received in the Albaz Strike Structure deck, who belong to these other archetypes but also directly support Albaz, providing us relevant options for each of our fusions to flow into to continue our plays with. Thus, with Mirror Jade, we have the means to proactively trigger this graveyard effect without the need for our fusions to be outed by our opponent, which allows us to actually make progressive plays on our own terms. Furthermore, like the aforementioned fusions, Mirror Jade also has a graveyard effect as well. On the turn that it would be sent to the graveyard by your opponent, Mirror Jade will destroy all monsters your opponent controls in the end phase. This effect acts as a deterrent against your opponent destroying Mirror Jade, as doing so without protection effectively allows you to begin your turn with an empty opposing field. But don't forget, you can always proactively trigger this effect yourself by running into your opponent, allowing you to clear a field in a desperate situation. With the fusions now covered, we move on to the Fallen of Albaz support, beginning with 2 Albion the Shrouded Dragon. Albion, while on the field or in the graveyard, treats itself as a Fallen of Albaz, acting as a 3rd or 4th copy of Albaz in a pinch. More importantly, while in the hand or graveyard, Albion can send a Fallen of Albaz or branded spell or trap from the hand or deck to the graveyard to do one of two things, relative to where you sent that card from. If you send from the hand, Albion can special summon himself to the field from wherever he was. But if you send from the deck, Albion will tuck itself to the bottom of your deck, and if you tuck from the hand, draw you a card. Now, in most cases, most of your branded spells are better used in your hand than sent for Albion's effect. Thus, the only time you'll ever be special summoning Albion is by sending a Fallen of Albaz from your hand. That is not exactly optimal, but it does allow you to access a 2500 beater in a pinch. More importantly is the sending from deck part. Among the branded support, there exists a subset of branded spells and traps that have effects in the graveyard, and Albion provides you an easy way to set them up. Likewise, sometimes you do want an Albaz in the graveyard for a card like Lubellion, and Albion provides you a way to dump one directly from the deck. Additionally, if that effect is used from the hand, Albion then replaces himself with another card, effectively making this the freest dump in the game. Lastly, because it is relevant, I do want to point out that Albion is a 2500 level 8 dark monster that can special summon himself, meaning that he meets the summoning requirements for a majority of your Albaz fusions. Thus, he's a card that you can use even when fusing to access all your options for flexible play. From there, we continue onwards with a new monster in our 3 Spriggans kit. Kit, while in the hand, can special summon itself from the hand while you have a Fallen of Albaz fusion on your field or in the graveyard. This means that so long as you have such a fusion, Kit is also an extender that you can access beyond your normal summon. This benefits making use of her second effect, which on summon allows you to add any branded spell or trap from the deck to your hand to then tuck a card from your hand to the bottom of your deck. As this is a Fallen of Albaz deck tangentially related to making level 8 fusions, this effect allows you to grab for any of the theme support in helping you get your plays off, while also allow you to tuck back bricks like Fallen of Albaz. Now obviously in low resource hands, Kit doesn't do much, but in an opening hand she allows you to grab your best support while also putting more bodies on the field for X deck plays. Furthermore, as a Spriggan, she can be accessed directly from the deck through Sprint's end phase effect, and as a beast monster, she has some unique synergies with Brigand that is also a beast that we'll explore later. Next up, we have another new monster in our 2 Tri-Brigade Malcourier. Malcourier, while you control an Albaz fusion, can send itself from the hand or field to the graveyard to negate an opponent's activated monster effect. This is functionally a hand trap for the deck, adding an extra layer of disruption to your present Albaz fusions to negate whatever your opponent's monsters might throw at you. But that's not all. Should Malcourier be banished, he can also add any monster that lists Fallen of Albaz in its text from the deck to your hand. This gives Malcourier some use even after he's sent to the graveyard for its first effect, allowing you to combo it with a card like your Albion the Branded Dragon to fusion summon a second time while also adding an Albaz support card to your hand. Additionally, as a Tri-Brigade, Malcourier can be added by the end phase effect of your Brigand, ensuring that you can start the following turn with a negate primed. Then, wrapping up the Albaz support, we have the one incredible Ecclesia the Virtuous. Incredible Ecclesia can special summon herself from the hand while your opponent controls more monsters than you. Furthermore, as a quick effect, Incredible Ecclesia can tribute herself to special summon a Sword Soul or a Fallen of Albaz from the deck. Now, while you aren't running any Sword Souls in this deck, the ability to flash in a Fallen of Albaz has uses. Not only does this allow you to access a Fallen of Albaz on your turn if needed, but Incredible Ecclesia's effect can be used on your opponent's turn as well to have an Albaz summon effect act as disruption. But more importantly is Ecclesia's graveyard effect. During the end phase, if a fusion monster was sent to your graveyard that turn, Incredible Ecclesia can add itself back to your hand. This theoretically provides you an infinitely recurring body for all your material and discard costs that you can access so long as you can find a way to send one of your fusions to the graveyard. Additionally, as a light monster, Ecclesia meets the fusion summoning requirements to make your Albion the Branded Dragon, an aspect that is relevant when we have cards like the upcoming Branded Fusion that can fuse from the deck, giving us an easy way to set up that Ecclesia in the graveyard for the rest of the game. With the Albaz related monsters now covered, we continue onwards with a Despia package consisting of 3 Albaz the Jester of Despia and 2 Despian Tragedy. Albaz, like Kit, searches for branded spells and traps on summon. Alongside Kit, that gives us 6 cards that we can open to grab into our branded spells and traps. Furthermore, Albaz can also revive himself from the graveyard whenever one of your level 8 fusions, like your Albaz fusions, would leave the field by your opponent, and in doing so can negate the effects of one of your opponent's monsters. This effect isn't widely relevant but can become key in blanking an OTK, while also turning off one of your opponent's monsters for the coming turn. And because Albaz is still a Despia monster, he can be searched by your Despian Tragedy whenever Tragedy would be sent to the graveyard or banished by a card effect, like your fusion summons. This synergizes well with your upcoming branded fusion or Albion the Branded Dragon, as both give you easy ways to send or banish Tragedy to trigger its search. Furthermore, it should be noted that Tragedy also can banish itself from the graveyard to set back any branded spell or trap in your graveyard, meaning that once in the grave, Tragedy doubles as any branded spell or trap you've played this game. The only limitation to this Despia package is that they themselves cannot be searched by your Albaz related searchers. As a result, they can be a little awkward to play around with your Albaz cards. Then, wrapping up the non-hand trap monsters, we finally have the one Fairy Tale Snow. As a light monster, Snow acts as an alternative to your Incredible Ecclesia as the light target to make your Albion. And while in the grave, Snow has the ability to banish your cards to recur herself for an additional body and a Book of Moon-esque effect. This gives you one additional layer of disruption in a pinch, while also potentially allow you to trigger the banish effect of your Tri-Brigade Melcourier. Now, unfortunately, because she needs 7 cards to banish from your hand, field, or graveyard to summon herself, she may not always be live in the early game. But as the game progresses, you'll find that it's surprisingly easy to load up your graveyard with the 7 cards necessary to pay for Snow, which only makes your grind game that much better. Finally, wrapping up the monsters, we have the hand traps in 3 Effect Veiler and 3 Ash Blossom. Both are just run-of-the-mill good hand traps for this format, but Veiler is also a light, meaning that he also has additional synergy as a material for your Albion the Branded Dragon. And as you'll see in the upcoming spell and trap lineup, we do have ways beyond Albion the Branded Dragon of fusing with materials from the grave, meaning that even after we've used Veiler for his effect, we have ways of making use of him for fusions later. Going into the spells, we begin with the deck's most powerful playmaker in 3 Branded Fusion. Similar to Fallen Albaz himself, Branded Fusion has one simple but powerful effect. It allows you to fusion summon any fusion monster requiring Fallen of Albaz as a listed material, using monsters from your hand, field, or deck. This functionally allows you to fusion summon for free by way of purely fusing from the deck, and is by far one of the most powerful effects a fusion deck can be afforded. Because it can access resources from the hand, field, or deck, it means that it can almost always access the Fallen of Albaz needed for all your fusions. This not only makes tuckback effects like your Spriggan's Kit much more meaningful, but also means that we can run less copies of the Bricky Fallen of Albaz in our deck. And because all of your Fallen of Albaz fusions possess such generic material requirements, Branded Fusion consequently also doubles as a means to dump a variety of different monsters from your deck to the graveyard, which gives you access to a plethora of different graveyard effects for really cool setups. For example, by using Branded Fusion to summon out a Titanclad or Brigand, we can dump a Shrouded Albion to set up any branded spell or trap in our graveyard. Alternatively, by using Branded Fusion to summon Albion or Lubellion, we can send any of the aforementioned light or dark targets for benefit of our choosing. The only limitation to Branded Fusion is that you cannot summon anything except for fusion monsters from your extra deck the turn you activate it, meaning that you can't access any of your other Link toolbox options. But in a deck primarily focused on fusion summoning, this is barely a limitation as it is a semantic to your plays. From there, we have another fusion spell in our 2 Branded in White. Branded in White allows you to fusion summon a fusion monster using monsters from your hand or field, so long as one of those materials is a dragon. However, should you use Fallen of Albaz as a material, you may also banish materials from your grave as well. This is functionally Miracle Fusion for the Fallen of Albaz deck, allowing you to potentially produce a costless fusion by purely fusing from your graveyard. This allows you to get second mileage off of cards you previously sent to the graveyard for prior plays, like a spent Valor or a spent Albaz. Likewise, it also works to trigger the effects of cards like your Despian Tragedy or Tri-Brigade Malcourier when they're banished. Additionally, during the end phase, if Brandon and White was sent to the graveyard to activate the effect of a Fallen of Albaz, Brandon and White can set itself to your field. This not only helps you mitigate the cost of using a Fallen of Albaz's effect, but also allows you to use a Shrouded Albion, treating itself as a Fallen of Albaz in the graveyard, to effectively pseudo-search this card. Unfortunately, because Brandon and White does this on the end phase, you really can't make use of it that turn. But in certain fusion configurations, this creates a great follow-up plan for you to end games with on your coming turn. Wrapping up the fusion spells, we have the last branded fusion as card in the single Branded in Red. Branded in Red is a quick play spell that, when activated, allows you to add a Despia or Fallen of Albaz from your graveyard to your hand, to then optionally perform a fusion summon by banishing materials from the hand or field. Now, since we aren't running a massive Despia package, our ability to use this card is much more limited compared to other variants. But the card does allow you to perform a fusion summon as a spell speed 2 quick effect, which in certain grave setups does allow you to access powerful cards like Guardian Chimera on your opponent's turn. Additionally, because it banishes the materials, you can also use Branded in Red to trigger the banish effects of cards like your Malcourier or Tragedy. And it's important to note that the fusion effect of Branded in Red is entirely optional, meaning that you can always just use Branded in Red to add back a Despia monster or a Fallen of Albaz for later use as well. With our fusion spells covered, we continue this branded parade with another quick play spell in 2 Branded in High Spirits. Branded in High Spirits is a peculiar card. When activated, Branded in High Spirits requires that you reveal a monster in your hand to then send a level A fusion monster with 2500 attack or defense from your X deck to the graveyard with the same type. In doing this, you can then optionally send that revealed monster to the graveyard to then add another monster from your deck who is either a Fallen of Albaz or list Fallen of Albaz in its text. Now, on a basic level, Branded in High Spirits is a way for you to trade any viable monster in your hand for a Fallen of Albaz related support from your deck. But it also has the benefit of sending one of your various Fallen of Albaz fusions from your X deck directly to your graveyard, which in turn sets up their graveyard effect as well. These 2 aspects in combination allow you to do some very cool plays depending on the card you reveal. For example, by revealing a Shrouded Albion from your hand, you can send a Branded Albion to the graveyard to then guarantee an end phase search. Then by sending that Shrouded Albion to the graveyard, you can then add a Spriggan's Kit to your hand. Since you now have a Branded Albion in your graveyard through High Spirit's effect, you can then special summon that kit to add Branded Fusion to your hand. Furthermore, since you send a Shrouded Albion to your graveyard with High Spirit's effect, you can also use its effect as well to dump another card for plays as well. Speaking more on Spriggan's Kit, you can also combo Kit with Branded in High Spirits to end on double disruptions. By revealing your kit, you can send a Begrand to the graveyard. Then, since its add is optional, you can choose not to send the kit to the graveyard, but instead special summon her from the hand since Begrand is now in your graveyard. You can then use Kit's effect to add Branded Fusion to make Mirror Jade before proceeding to your end phase, of which Begrand will then trigger to add your Tri-Brigade Malcourier to your hand for double disruptions on your opponent's turn. But those line of combos aren't the only benefits that Branded in High Spirit provides. While in the graveyard, Branded in High Spirits has the same effect as your Incredible Ecclesia, able to return itself to the hand on the end phase of any turn a fusion was sent to your graveyard. This provides you the same benefits as your Incredible Ecclesia, but also provides you an infinite means to search for any of your Fallen of Albaz support. The only limitation of Branded in High Spirits is that not every monster in your deck has a type that can work with it. Currently, there exists no good fairy or spellcaster target for Branded in High Spirits, such that you can reveal a Despia or an Ecclesia for its effect with double benefits. As such, there will be situations where this card can be bricky. Thus, we're running 2 on the idea that we don't always need to see it, but can always set it up if we require it. Moving on from there, we then have 2 Branded Lost. Branded Lost, a continuous spell, is kind of like a magical meltdown for the branded deck. While face up on the field, Branded Lost ensures that your opponent cannot negate the activations of cards or the activations of effects that fusion summon a monster. Additionally, when a monster would be fusion summoned, your opponent cannot activate cards or effects in that summon response window. This massively benefits your Albaz fusions, as many of them have on-summon effects that need to successfully resolve to get you anywhere in the game. This also benefits Branded Lost's own second effect to search for any monster list fallen of Albaz in its text whenever you would successfully summon a fusion monster. This results in a way for you to search into all your Albaz support options without having to worry about cards like Ash. This also humorously is a way for you to safely make use of Fallen of Albaz's effect in the face of a field full of negations, allowing you to fuse away your opponent's field while also netting you replacement to its discard in Branded Lost Search. Finally, wrapping up the spells with some consistency options, we open with 3 Branded Opening to get into all our Despias while also protecting our fusions from destruction with its Graveyard effect. We have 1 Foolish Burial to send our Tragedy to trigger its Graveyard effect, and 1 Gold Sarcophagus to banish Tragedy or Malcoyer to trigger their banish effects. We have 2 Forbidden Droplets for sending our fusions to turn off our opponent's opposing field, and lastly 1 Call by the Grave for hand traps. Going into the traps, we have 2 unique ones that come out of the Albaz Strike Structure deck in the 1 Branded Retribution and 1 Branded Sword. Starting with our Branded Retribution can be activated whenever your opponent would activate a spell, trap, or monster effect that would summon a monster, of which you can then return an Albaz fusion you control, or 2 from your graveyard to negate that effect. This is actually a pretty useful effect, as it can recycle your fusions while also negating any of the various extension effects that exist in the modern metagame. Branded Sword, on the other hand, allows you to banish any number of branded spells or traps in your graveyard to summon the same number of Ice Blade tokens to your field. These Ice Blade tokens possess a whopping 2500 attack, and in certain board states can be used to facilitate OTKs. But that's not all. Both Branded Retribution and Branded Sword can banish themselves to add back either a banished branded spell or trap in Retribution's case, or a banished Albaz support monster in Sword's case. This effect is likely the more important of the 2 effects granted to each trap, as they allow you to recycle cards that you may have banished for things like Snow, Branded in White, or Branded Albion. This is especially easy to set up thanks to your Shrouded Albion, who can send both cards directly from the deck to the graveyard. Unfortunately, because both cards do require setup to activate, they can be a little dead initially to open. But with cards like Shrouded Albion, Branded Opening, Kit, and Lubellion at our disposal, it's never quite hard to get them immediately into the graveyard where they can immediately start generating value. Finally, wrapping up the deck profile with the remainder of our X deck, beyond the Albaz fusions we have a few remaining tech options. Starting off, we have the 1 Predaplan Dragostapelia that we can make using any of our Albaz fusions alongside any of the various darks in our deck. We then have the 1 Guardian Chimera that we can make on our opponent's turn thanks to our Branded in Red. For the 2 links we're playing, we have the 1 Verte Anaconda, which can copy and send Branded Fusion to use its effect to make an easy Mirror Jade, as well as the 1 Proxy F Magician for a Desperate Fusion summon on your turn if needed. Now it's at this point that we once again reach the combo component of our deck profile. Now, for a deck possessing a card that can fuse from the deck, the Albaz deck is not one geared toward explosive plays. While it can very well assemble OTKs, the Albaz deck likes to play a good grind game, making use of its various graveyard effects to functionally rebuild a new hand on each end phase. Thus, for this combo component, I'll be doing 2 test hands to showcase this. What's going to happen is that I'm going to draw a hand of 5 and then try to build the best board possible with it. From there, I'll then demonstrate how the deck can interact with this board in the following turn. With that being said, I believe that the deck is shuffled, the field is ready, so let us begin. Getting right into things with our first test hand, the hand that we're going to be working with first is going to consist of 1 Branded Lost, 1 Spriggan's Kit, 1 Branded in White, 1 Branded High Spirits, and 1 Effect Veiler. So looking at this hand on an initial level, it seems that we've opened a lot of great playmakers, only limited by the fact that we don't have an initial fusion to get things rolling. But that's where our Spriggan's Kit will kick us off. We're going to start by normal summoning out that Spriggan's Kit and using her effect to then grab a branded spell or trap, of which I'll grab a branded fusion. Then, resolving Spriggan's Kit's effect, I'll then take this effect veil and put it to the bottom of my deck. From there, we'll then activate the branded loss to provide some insurance for our fusions before then activating the branded fusion, allowing me to fuse from my deck a Albion, the Shrouded Dragon, alongside a Fallen of Albaz. In this, I can treat the Albion as a level 8 to then summon out my Brigand, the Glory Dragon. Now, since I successfully fusion summon, I can then activate the effect of my Branded Lost to add another monster from my deck that lists Fallen of Albaz in its text, of which I will then proceed to add a second Albion, the Shrouded Dragon. Now, this play may seem a little odd, especially since we already do have an Albion in our graveyard, but the reason we're doing this is because in the line of play that I have in my head, we're going to be needing a lot of monsters that can treat itself as Fallen of Albaz, and you're about to see why. I'm going to activate this branded in white, fusing the Albion in my graveyard treating itself as Fallen of Albaz alongside the kit from my field as a dark monster to summon out my Lubellion, the Searing Dragon. In this situation, I will then activate Lubellion's effect, an effect that our opponent cannot respond to thanks to our branded loss, to then send the other Albion, the Shrouded Dragon, from my hand to the grave to fuse from my field, grave, or banished. I'm then going to fuse the Lubellion on my field alongside the Fallen of Albaz in my graveyard, shuffling both into the deck, to then summon out from my X deck the Mirror Jade, the Iceblade Dragon. Now, we could end this board right now with just the Mirror Jade and the Brigand, but I do want to make use of this branded in High Spirits, and that's where the two Albions come into play. I'm going to activate the effect of the Shrouded Dragon in my graveyard, sending a branded spell or trap from my deck to the graveyard, in this case the Branded Sword, before, since I sent from the deck, taking this Albion and putting it to the bottom of my deck. I can then activate the effect of the Branded Sword in my graveyard, banishing it to then add back my banished Albion to my hand, of which I can then activate the effect of my Branded High Spirits, revealing the Albion in my hand to send an Albion the Branded Dragon from my X deck to the graveyard, send the Albion the Shrouded Dragon from my hand to the graveyard, to then add another monster that lists Fallen of Albaz in its text, of which I'll add my Tri-Brigade Malcourier. Now, proceeding to the end phase, I can then activate the effect of my Albion the Branded Dragon in my graveyard, allowing me to set a branded spell or trap from my deck to the field, and that gives me a few options. I can optionally set a Branded Retribution to negate a summon effect, but in this case, I'm actually going to set from my deck a Branded in red, so that I can fusion summon on my opponent's turn, of which then I will pass turn to my opponent. Going into our opponent's turn, we have a few things at our disposal. Obviously, at the bare minimum, we have a Mirror Jade that can send any Fallen of Albaz fusion from our X deck to the graveyard to non-targeting banish a monster. In doing so, our preferred target will be the Sprin, the Iron Dash Dragon. Additionally, we do have a Brigand on the field that cannot be destroyed by battle, but also prevents our opponent from targeting our Mirror Jade with monster effects, making baiting out that Mirror Jade a little harder. Likewise, we also have a Tri-Brigade Malcourier in our hand that we can send from our hand to the graveyard to negate any monster effect, as well as the Branded in red. Now, in most combos that you see branded in red, you'll be adding back a Despia monster, but since we don't have any Despias in our grave, what we can add back instead is a Fallen of Albaz. And since we do have an Albion that we did put into the graveyard that treats itself as a Fallen of Albaz, we can activate branded red, adding back this Albion, before then fusing with both our Brigand, our Mirror Jade, as well as the Albion, to summon out our Guardian Chimera on our opponent's turn. In doing this, Guardian Chimera's effect will trigger to target two of our opponent's cards, destroy them, allow us to draw one card since we fuse from our hand one monster, of which none of those effects can be spawned thanks to our Branded Lost. Likewise, our Branded Lost will then activate to also grab us a monster from our deck to the hand that lists Fallen of Albaz as a material, of which we can add something like our Incredible Ecclesia to our hand. Now, proceeding to the end phase, since we did disrupt our opponent approximately 4 to 5 times, we can then activate a number of effects in our graveyard. First off, since we send a fusion to the graveyard, we can activate Branded High Spirits effect to add itself to the hand. Then we can also activate the effect of our Sprin, the Iron Dash Dragon, since it was sent to the graveyard, to add a monster that is a Spriggan's monster from our deck to the hand, of which I'll add a Spriggan's Kit. Allow me to start my turn with a 3300 beater and 4 cards on our hand, 2 of which is essentially another starter for another play to end our opponent with. Then, going into our second and last test hand, the hand that we're going to end on with today is going to consist of 1 Spriggan's Kit, 1 Branded Opening, 1 Fairy Tale Snow, 1 Branded Sword, and 1 Fallen of Albaz. Okay, so this hand compared to the first hand is a lot worse. Not only did we open theoretically 2 bricks in our Fallen of Albaz and our Branded Sword, but we also have a Fairy Tale Snow that we can't make use of until we get to the graveyard. Fortunately, our Branded Opening and our Spriggan's Kit will probably get us there. We're going to start by activating this Branded Opening, sending this Branded Sword in our hand to the graveyard, to then special summon out a Despia monster from my deck, of which I'll summon out an Albaz, the Jester of Despia. Albaz's effect on summon will then activate to then allow me to add another Branded Spell or Trap from my deck to the hand, of which I will add a Branded in High Spirits. We're then going to activate this Branded in High Spirits, revealing this kit in our hand to then send a Brigand the Glory Dragon from our X deck to the graveyard. But we're not going to send this kit forward to then search for another card. Instead, the real purpose of this Branded in High Spirits was to get this Brigand in the graveyard, of which we can now special summon out the kit since we have an Albaz fusion in our graveyard. Kit on summon will then allow us to add another Branded Spell or Trap, of which will add the Branded Fusion before then tucking back into the deck our Fallen of Albaz, getting rid of one of our bricks. From there, we can then activate this Branded Fusion, sending from our deck to the graveyard the Fallen of Albaz that we just put back, alongside a light monster in something, let's say, like our Incredible Ecclesia. To then summon out from our X deck a Albion the Branded Dragon. Albion the Branded Dragon on summon will then allow me to fusion summon a second time using monsters from my field, hand, or graveyard by banishing them, of which I'll then banish the Fallen of Albaz alongside the kit as a dark monster to summon out my Lubellion the Searing Dragon. Now that Lubellion summoned, Lubellion's effect will then activate, allowing me to send this snow from my hand to the grave to then perform a fusion summon by shuffling back the materials from my field, grave, or banished, of which I can then shuffle back the Fallen of Albaz alongside the Lubellion to then summon out my Mirror Jade. Now, we're not done quite there. We can then activate the effect of our Branded Sword, banishing it to then add back the kit to our hand for use later, before then proceeding to our end phase where a few effects will happen. Now, since we have the Ecclesia in our graveyard and we did send a fusion this turn, we can add this Ecclesia back to our hand. Likewise, we can then activate the effect of our Brigand the Glory Dragon, since it was sent to the graveyard, to then add a Tri-Brigade monster to our hand, of which we can then add a Tri-Brigade Malcourier, of which then I will pass turn to my opponent. Going into our opponent's turn, let's consider our options once again. Like always in our last field, we have the Mirror Jade the Iceblade Dragon that can send a Fallen of Albaz fusion, like the Sprint, to the graveyard to non-targeting banish one of our opponent's monsters, in doing so setting up the end phase Sprint for a kit search. Furthermore, since we control one of the 2 fusions that list Fallen of Albaz as its material, we can activate this Tri-Brigade Malcourier as well to negate any monster effect. But let's not forget that we also have a Fairy Tale Snow in our graveyard that we can activate in desperate situations. By banishing 7 cards from our hand, field, or graveyard, we could summon out the Snow to then set one of our opponent's monsters, and that can be useful in a lot of situations. So let's say we do that. We're going to banish this Branded Opening, we're going to banish this Brigand, we're also going to banish out this Branded Fusion alongside the 2 cards in our hand, as well as this Albaz, and as well as this Tri-Brigade Malcourier to summon out the Snow. In doing this will also trigger out Tri-Brigade Malcourier's effect to then out us and Albion the Shrouded Dragon for our following turn. And usually these 3 disruptions will be enough, but I also want to point out that if our opponent does even proceed to clear the field from here, it would be at our benefit, because in doing so, our Mirror Jade will then clear the field, and then our Albion will then set us a Branded Fusion for the following turn. Regardless of that, however, on our end phase we're guaranteed 2 effects. We have the Sprint as well as the Branded in High Spirits, with Branded in High Spirits adding itself back to the hand, and then the Sprint adding us a Tri-Brigade kit for our following turn, of which all these cards added to our hand will then allow us an entirely new play to probably end the game with. And that's going to do it for our Albaz deck profile. So what are my final thoughts on the deck? Well, obviously compared to a more meta variant like Branded Despia or Branded Invoked, the deck lags behind. With nowhere near as many 1-card engines, the deck does require a lot to go right to produce the same end boards as other variants. But god, is this deck fun to play. It's always enjoyable seeing how one of your cards flows into the next, and the synergy that the different fusions provide to bring this disjoint Albaz archetypes together is just a work of art. Sure, the deck is nowhere near as powerful, but in a format full of one-card boring engines, I think players will have a much more enjoyable time playing this than trying to figure out the next 500 IQ way to normal summon Alistair. But this is also not the end of our Albaz journey. One of the unique aspects of the new Albaz cards is their backwards compatibility with the other Albaz archetypes, and I'm keen on going out Spriguns blazing while I can. But until then, this has been Tony, your deck architect, with an Albaz deck profile. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you guys next time.